Hello and welcome to Sky Career Talks, why we display why it's great to learn with us and communicate. I'm your host, David James. I'm super excited to be speaking with Stephanie Siano Landman, a Sky Communication alumnus. Stephanie has an extensive background working in public relations as well as the different tracks of corporate communications. Stephanie has managed a portfolio of different accounts within the extensive expanse of B2B technology field. She's previously worked at Shift Communications, and she's now in a new sector, property technology for Delos Living, where she serves as a global communications manager. We're super excited to learn more about Stephanie's background, career journey, and how one gets into this field, as well as her perspective on networking. We present to you my interview with Stephanie Siano Landman. Okay, so thank you for taking the time to be here with us, Stephanie. Before we begin, I must ask, how are you today?
Doing very well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm doing good. Happy Friday. It's always good, in the week, on a productive, talk and conversation and interview. S-
Absolutely.
So to kick us off, give us a brief overview of your career journey so far.
Absolutely. So I studied communication at SC&I, and after graduation, I accepted an internship with a PR firm called Shift Communications in New York City. Actually, I can actually dial it back. Prior to that, prior to graduation, I accepted an internship with a very small home interior design company. It was a one-person shop, a self-employed entrepreneur who was looking to expand her presence on social media a bit. This gave me a really great opportunity for me to dig into the world of branding, social media experience, client services, and communication. I parlayed that experience into the larger internship that I got post grad, which became a full-time job once I was able to develop the relationships internally within the agency. I ended up within the PR agency. There are several different tracks you can go when you're in a career in PR, and I selected B2B technology as it really spoke a little bit more to my interests in corporate communications, and ascended through the ranks from intern to account coordinator, account executive, senior account executive, all the way up to account manager, where I managed a portfolio of about 8 to 10 different accounts, all within the B2B tech field. That touches on everything from e-commerce and retail technology to financial technology, manufacturing technology, all of the things that sound incredibly boring, but when you actually take the time to look at the nuance and stories behind them, are incredibly interesting, as they really do tell the tale of how our society is currently working. After about 8 years at Shift Communications, I was presented with an incredible opportunity to join a different organization. Not quite a startup, it's a somewhat matured company founded in 2014 that focuses on a new sector, prop tech, property technology. It's called Delos Living. I serve now as the communications manager for Delos across their entire US sector, as well as Canada, South America, Australia, and some work in Europe as well. So a real global view. And at my new organization, our goal is to transform our indoor environments into vehicles for health and well-being. So really anything from the, indoor air quality that we're breathing to our water quality, the lighting design to ensure that it's, beneficial and not, hurting our circadian rhythms, to thermal comfort and everything in between. So definitely have, gone from end to end of all the different sectors of technology that touch business to business, work.
And it's so important right now to be able to go into these industry roles, such as, technology, and being able to take that information, synthesize it, and being able to communicate and build a story. That way it communicates to the public in a very digestible way, but you're also communicating that brand in a very creative and strategic way.
Absolutely. It really does take a very creative approach to these sectors in order to make it interesting. Really, you're taking some very nitty gritty, jargon filled language and trying to translate that to anyone else in the general population in order to make it interesting. So, really, as a communications professional, you serve as that toggle between the people that are doing the core competency work and the rest of the world. You become the face of an organization without being the face of an organization. organization. You are almost like that invisible storyteller to get, the company's mission, brand, and identity out to the world.
Well, I'm enjoying, hearing your journey so far because what I've always thought, communicators need to be able to bridge outside of their own industry and being able to, learn something such as data analytics or technology and, combine those assets and skill sets to leverage within their own position and own career. That way, it becomes easier for them to understand, okay, how looking at this piece of data, how do I communicate that to the public or internally to the organization and leverage that?
Yep, absolutely. If you don't understand something, it's going to be incredibly difficult to translate it to anybody else. So the first big piece I would give to anybody looking to get into a career of communications is really understand what it is that you're trying to communicate, not just the words as they appear, but the actual meaning behind it. Always be prepared for a follow-up question. No matter what sector you're working in, it's expected that you have an understanding of the actual material itself. And for that, it's always best to have some kind of foundational understanding, and taking a little bit of time to really bone up and learn about that industry. So I as a generalist myself, I always say it's my big party trick is that tell me what you do for a living and I can pull out about 3 different fun facts about it, because it is important to be able to have that, again, foundational understanding of each of those different topics.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, what does a normal day look like for you?
A lot of emails, but in actuality, my day to day really does vary, which is one of the reasons I love working in communications. No one day looks identical to the next. So really, I start my day reading. I read as many different news stories as I can. I go through Twitter. I go through LinkedIn religiously to try to see what people are talking about, what's driving conversation, what's driving news, and how are people positioning the news right now? What are the top stories? What are the top trends that are relevant? And then looking through that from the lens of my organization. What I personally find interesting might not be the same as what's most relevant to my company, or if I were working in an agency still, what's most relevant for my clients. So taking about an hour each morning to just parse through the news, parse through some of the trending topics to see if there's anything that I can jump off on and do right away. I do a lot of media outreach as well. So a lot of my time is spent, not only reading journalist stories, but responding to them. People that are working specifically in the PR field of communications are going to be responsible for developing and maintaining relationships with reporters, bloggers, anyone in the media. So it's important, if you're going to be having conversations with them, that you understand what they're actually talking about. There is nothing worse than pitching a reporter and having it be nothing that they're interested in or nothing that they would ever cover. So making sure that you are, when reaching out and emailing journalists, that you really understand what it is you're talking about. I also do a lot of work in internal communications right now. And that means taking information that comes from my C-suite, my chief executive officer, my chief operating officer, digesting it, and then translating it to the rest of the company. That requires a lot of, strategic insight on what's a message that's best delivered via email, with that kind of gravitas from a chief executive, email versus what can be a Slack message, what's a little bit more casual, what's a little bit more day-to-day and colloquial, and giving advice to the entire organization to ensure that all of the information that they need to complete their day-to-day roles is easily available for them. Another part of my day involves reputation management, and this has become incredibly important. So the way that we're first tackling this is with executive visibility. So I actually manage the LinkedIn accounts for both our chief executive officer and our chief operating officer to ensure that they're consistently sharing thought leadership insight for their networks. So a lot of my day is parsing through their messages, making sure that I'm engaging with, relevant contacts, relevant other thought leaders, and posting content that's interesting and people want to engage with. And then finally, I do a lot of drafting. I do a lot of writing. I'm a writer by trade. When I was at Rutgers, I was actually a part of various, writing organizations and performing organizations. So the creative aspect there is drafting byline content, thought leadership content, scripts for any, industry events, abstracts for potential white papers that are going out. If there's written material to be done, that's on me.
Well, I love hearing all the multifaceted aspects of your job. And as communicators, it's so important to know, one form of public relations, but also going into reputation management, perhaps, learning about crisis, how to, troubleshoot, problem solve, and really get ahead of the problem and the crisis at hand, but also being able to build those relationships with the media, the public as well as internally within the organization.
Absolutely. And crisis communications is such an important skill set to learn and master. And that's something that I would advise anybody going into communications is to really learn about crisis communications. It's an art. Actually, I would rather say it's an art and a science at the same time. So it's something that every organization at some point is going to experience, and to be able to help an entire organization navigate a crisis, whether that's bad press, whether that's, a problem, a malfunction with a product, really anything, you can see just how bad, crisis communications, when handled right, you will never know it existed. And crisis communications, when handled wrong, the entire world knows.
And a lot of the time, when crisis occurs, it's because the company or organization doesn't even know or had began to process that they're even in a crisis in that moment.
Right. There's a big part of being proactive, and that's where a lot of the social listening and media monitoring comes into effect with a communications professional. You need to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening all the time. But more importantly, you also have to understand where the white spaces and the liability points are. So when you're working with an organization, whether you're in-house, at an agency, wherever, it's good to ask the hard questions of what can we be hit with? Is there a problem with our product? Is there any issue with our executive? Are our founders or funders, investors? Is there anything seedy or dangerous going on there? The more you know, the more you're able to prepare. Knowledge is power.
So, are there any type of skills that students could be learning to leverage now, both technical and interpersonal?
Yes, definitely. I would say learning to critically read is very important. Reading is something that, we do a lot at school and we don't really think too much about it, but really being able to quickly, read, digest, understand, and be able to repeat or reiterate in your own words is so incredibly important, because you are going to be kind of that funnel for information and your company. You're going to be that toggle. Similarly, I cannot express just how important the fundamentals of writing are. I have seen so much poor writing in my experience, and really just a sentence that has incorrect punctuation, incorrect grammar, spelling errors, typos will get something completely thrown out without any consideration for the actual substance of it. Also, I think being in school is a great time for you to get into good habits of, scanning and monitoring the news. Bone up on the publications that you enjoy, figure out which writers you like, figure out which writers you don't really enjoy their news as much. And the more you're able to do that, the more you're able to figure out what you actually enjoy, the more you'll want to do it. So it makes it a lot easier.
Well, I was going to ask because so many people are beginning to set up news alerts, whether it's on social media or I believe in the New York Times, you have that setting where you can set up notifications hourly or whenever there's a news story breaking within their publication or application, that you're able to set it up, whether it's phone alerts, email alerts, or social media.
Yes, definitely. I always have my New York Times set up. I also am an NPR junkie. I love NPR, both in terms of their actual written content as well as their podcast and radio programming. So find a couple niche publications that you really find to be intriguing, that are in a style and format that you like. Not everything's always written. Again, there's a lot of opportunity in podcasts and video journalism. Communications is a multimedia industry. So, you have to be able to navigate what the story is that you're trying to tell or share, and then what's the best vehicle to be able to tell that story in a meaningful way. Because sometimes the addition of visuals or the addition of audio makes a story significantly richer than it ever could have been with just plain text alone.
And, just being able to digest, the different outlets and sources of news, being able to see how, okay, this story, how is it presented through text, among different organizations, but also how does it work, just watching, local or national news on television, but also, okay, listening to the audio podcast format because it's storytelling at the end of the day. And depending on the organization, on the news organization, it's presented in a myriad of different ways to entice their viewers and their audience.
Absolutely. I always start my day with my two news podcasts. I personally like Up First and The Daily. Those are my two go-to news podcasts just because their way of storytelling, they're very different from each other. One's more long form and one just quick, what you need to know about the daily goings on, and then you're done. But it really does complement and give me a more holistic understanding of what the larger news environment is, and then how I can best seed in my own storytelling within that larger environment. A lot of times, one of the biggest mistakes I can see is trying to tell a story that the world's not ready for or isn't interested in at that time. It's important for you to be able to filter what it is that the message that you're trying to convey through the lens of what the world is already experiencing to ensure that you're not screaming into a void. There are audiences that are looking for your content. There's audiences that want that insight, and that the story that you're telling is actually getting to those ears.
And it's interesting, we're talking about audiences. I think a big part of our job is also learning how to gauge the behavior and the temperature of the public, right? And being able to, do market research or audience research within the group that we're targeting.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And there are a lot of different ways to go about that. I'm actually a big proponent. I'm a big data nerd. I really love doing things like surveys, getting actual consumer insights, because going to the horse's mouth is honestly probably the best way to go about it. There are a lot of other ways that you can go about it too. Social media is the easiest one. It's very easy to see. So when I'm publishing on LinkedIn, it's easy to see what topics are actually generating clicks, likes, shares, and which ones aren't. So once you're being able to kind of A/B test in real time there, you can continue to post the information that's serving audiences and that they're enjoying, and phase out the stuff that's not necessarily, resonating as well for those audiences.
Absolutely. And the analytic tools are there for students to use, whether it's impressions, likes, comments, and then going into settings and pulling up that report and seeing which posts are generating and gaining traction and which are not, and which hashtags are also appealing to that audience. So to move right along, how does one get into this field? Is it through certifications, portfolios, or perhaps networking and having that LinkedIn presence?
There are so many different ways. And honestly, the best one I can give you is experience. So this is going to be challenging, as I think we are all acutely aware. Almost every single entry-level job requires experience, which is a conundrum in and of itself. So the best advice I can give is to look for internships during your summer breaks, or even virtual part-time internships or apprenticeships while you're at school. I credit a lot of my career to having my first summer internship, which, while it was a much smaller one, it wasn't at a global agency or anything, and I wasn't doing anything particularly groundbreaking, it did get me in the door for my next internship. So because I had that relevant experience on my resume, and I was able to speak about the work that I had already started doing and the learning that I already had done at that point. I would also say to develop a portfolio for yourself. As communicators, we are writers and we are storytellers. So I would make sure that you are capturing all of the good writing that you are doing, the stuff that you either do for class and got, great feedback on, or even just any personal writing. At the end of the day, people want to hire people they want to work with. So I'll never forget my first job interview with the agency with which I worked. I brought in a couple different writing samples. A lot of them was, content that I generated as a part of, class assignments for SC&I. And I also had my own blog that I was writing about online dating. It was a very silly blog. It was satirical, and it really didn't have a lot of professional consequence. And some would say, don't share it with your employer. But I wanted them to know a little bit more about who I was and my ability to be a chameleon when it comes to writing and storytelling. So I shared it with my interviewer and said, just so you know, here's some more writing samples, an example of the various kinds of work that I can do. And they absolutely loved it. They loved seeing a little bit more of my personality. They loved seeing a little bit more of the well-rounded human being that they wanted to hire. I would also say, make sure that you're leaning into the hobbies that you have, because people do want to, again, hire well-rounded people. And while they're going to ask you about your experience, they also want to know a little bit more about the person that you are. And then finally, networking. It's going to be incredibly important. You won't ever be able to apply for a job that you don't know exists. So the more that you're able to meet people within the industry, understand the, kinds of work and industries that are interesting to you, and then try to develop as many connections as you can within that, you'll be able to see when job openings happen, and more importantly, have connection with the person once the job opening has been posted.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to your position, is there a favorite part of the job or something that motivates or drives you every day?
Yes, actually. One of the greatest things about my current job is that I work for an organization that is very much a research-based organization. We have a well living lab that studies how indoor environments impact the human condition, health, well-being, wellness, etc. In collaboration with the Mayo Clinic, actually, out in Rochester, Minnesota. And I recently had the opportunity to go visit this lab in Rochester and talk with all the scientists in an effort to help better translate the very scientific, technical language that they have that they're doing with their research, to be able to share all of that information with the general public. Because so the translation aspect is incredibly exciting. The data analysis is very exciting. And to be able to tell stories that other people wouldn't be able to is really just an incredibly exciting opportunity for me. I always joked with the scientists that I was speaking with, they're incredibly brilliant. They have more degrees at the end of their last name than the alphabet. And it's very easy to feel very intimidated there. And at one point, after a very long-winded presentation, I simply looked the researcher in the eye and it says, "So it sounds to me that you're saying," and then tried to succinctly repeat what that person said in one single sentence. And they said, "How did you do that?" Because what we do as communicators is just as impressive as what other people are able to do from a scientific research perspective or an engineering perspective or anything else. It's an art form. So to be able to use that experience to help benefit a company was really cool. And especially to be able to, kind of drive forward some research that's going to be very integral to how healthy our indoor environments are was very meaningful.
And it's important in a world that's, very fast-paced and 24/7 orientation to be able to take long-winded information and succinctly communicate that, in one or two sentences. That way, people who are reading or scrolling or even perhaps tweets and characters can just be able to read that and be able to digest that information and the main points of that story.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the hardest habits to break when you leave a college environment and you move into a professional environment is word count and page requirements. Now, we've all had to write those papers where you just keep going on and have to kind of create content from scratch because you have a minimum word requirement or a minimum page requirement. Those really don't exist as much in the professional environment. And really the rule of thumb is the shorter, the better. Nobody wants to sit there and read through 10 pages. They want what they need to know as fast as it can be. Look at the success of Axios, for example. Axios is a relatively new media organization. I think they founded somewhere around 2015, 2016. And their value proposition is that they deliver the news in a few sentences and some quick bullets, the top line, what do you need to know? And in today's social media, snackable content, environment that we're living in, being able to be shorter, pithier, and more succinct is an art form that students are going to have to a little bit teach themselves, just because it is incredibly different from the academic environment that you're exposed to in school.
Absolutely. And everything is very, snappy. Everything has to, be one sentence or a couple of words, tweets, even an
Yeah.
Instagram post. You can't be posting a paragraph. Got to make room for the hashtags, or even if you are putting text in a graphic, keep it snappy, right to the point, and communicate the important information rather than a whole story within that
Absolutely.
post. So to end, are there any lasting words that you have of wisdom for students, or perhaps a younger version of yourself that you wish you knew in school?
Um, Honestly, confidence, because everyone coming out of school is in exactly the same position. So it's very important to be confident in yourself, in the way that you speak, in the way that you present yourself. Also, once again, I can't underline this enough. It's very important for you to be a whole person. So make sure that you are investing your whole self in the areas of interest, whatever that is. I personally found a lot of passion in B2B tech, but it could be anything. It could be healthcare. It could be consumer, and it could be consumer goods. It could be just regular corporate communication. So whatever it is, invest yourself, and then also have some other interests. While at school, I did Rutgers Night Live, the sketch comedy group, as well as some improv groups, and that gave a lot of great talking points for my interviews, for just collaborating with coworkers. So really, to be able to round out the whole person, because that is, at the end of the day, what organizations want to hire.
Absolutely. And being able to pick up and utilize those skills, such as an improv, can be used, to leverage, later when you're giving a public speech somewhere or at a conference, and being able to, really think on your feet and, communicate information to the public.
Definitely. Oh, and if students haven't done it already, do take the public speaking class. I took it during a summer session of mine, and it was one of the most gratifying, enriching, and cool classes that I took at Rutgers. So I can't recommend that one highly enough. It really does give you a lot of lasting skills that you will need for the rest of your professional career.
And it's so important, right? Being able to, be in front of a press conference, to a group of reporters or the public, and being able to speak and synthesize and communicate information on behalf of your organization or at an event, or just being able to learn how to have those public speaking skills.
Absolutely. Even in a meeting, it's very important for junior level people to speak up. It's very intimidating sometimes. You never want to step on any toes. And, if you're young and, inexperienced, it might not be your natural inclination to raise your hand, to ask questions. Be bold. It is very important to have that confidence and be bold. And a public speaking class like that will give you that kind of confidence to not only, get up and speak in front of a press conference or at an event and give a presentation, but even just to simply speak up in a meeting and be able to articulate yourself very well amongst peers or executives within your own organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being able to take the time to be able to be in conversation with us, Stephanie. I really enjoyed getting to learn and engage with you and learn more about your career journey and the industry as a whole.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's been very exciting. I'm a very proud Scarlet Knight, so I'm very excited to help, my fellow, students, and then soon to be fellow alums, navigate the world of corporate communications.
That again was my interview with Stephanie Siano Landman. We look forward to connecting with Stephanie very soon. Thank you all for joining us for another edition of Sky Career Talks. And be sure to share, like, comment, and subscribe. Also follow our LinkedIn group page, Sky Career Corners, to connect with our brilliant students and alumni. Until next time, I'm David James. Take care.